Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and today I'm answering your questions. If you want to participate, all you have to do is leave your question down in the comment section below. Today's question comes from Instagram and it comes from Organically Done, and she asks, how do you lesson plan? Now my lesson planning has changed quite a bit over the years. And right now, currently, it's not the best way to lesson plan, but it's been working for us. Now, when we lesson planned in the past with, I think I used the program Excel at the time, I would do a weekly lesson plan and I would write in all the books that we're reading, even the spelling words, our mental math, all on that lesson plan. And it worked pretty well for us, but it was a lot of work to do those lesson plans, but I felt like it really kept us on task. And while we might not have done everything on the day that I indicated, at least it was a way and a roadmap for us to get to that by the end of the week. And if we didn't get to everything, at least we knew what we needed to make up and catch up on before moving forward. And I really liked that way because it kept my whole focus on our lessons in check, and it allowed me to have a basic overview of our main lesson blocks, and it really helped me break down my lessons on a daily basis. And I kind of miss that I don't do that anymore, especially now that my kids are a little bit older. You would think that I have more time to do that, but I've just kind of lost the interest in doing our lesson plans that way. And that's kind of sad for me because the way that I'm lesson planning these days means that it's a little bit more of a master checklist, and it's great. It's quite a bit less of a burden to get through all of our work. However, we don't stay on task as much. We don't get through all of our lessons as well. And there are some days where I do feel like, oh, I'm not sure what we should be doing today. And then we end up doing a lot of reading, which is great. That's part of our lessons. But then we're not producing a lot of work to go along with that. So let me back up and explain a little bit of our approach on our homeschool and what I expect from my children and what I expect from myself as well. We like to follow a Waldorf-inspired curriculum or approach, which means that we are doing main lesson blocks, which you can kind of envision them as unit studies. However, there is quite a difference between the two. If you want more information on that, you can check the description box below. I've done a few videos on the difference between main lesson blocks and unit studies if you want to see what the differences are between them. So we generally do a main lesson block or unit study approach, which means that we're focused on one particular subject area for a period of time. And during that time, we're still doing our math and some language arts on a daily basis, but the majority of our lesson time is dedicated to whatever main lesson block we are doing in that moment. Part of our main lesson block includes main lesson work, and our work is generally going to be found in a main lesson book. These books are blank pages, and sometimes you have line pages for the older children. And inside these books, the children are going to draw or illustrate their lessons. So it's an artistic representation of their lessons, not so much an art lesson in and of itself. And then you're going to have some written work, which you can envision as a narration or maybe a summary, but a little bit different than a summary. We're not looking for a complete regurgitation of the lesson. We're looking for their own understanding of the lesson. So it might not hit all the points that way a summary would, but it's their highlights and their understanding and their thoughts on the lesson. And that's going to be the narration or the written work that goes along with the lesson. So if suppose we're reading a book like this, 24 Hours in Ancient China. Now this might be something that I'm doing with my upper elementary, middle school, or high schooler. And it might be something that I assign to them, or it might be something that we are reading aloud. Now let's suppose that a chapter in this book takes us 2 days to read aloud. Well, by the time we're done with the chapter, that's when I would require some work or some lesson work for their main lesson book. So it's not so much that they're doing a daily illustration, it's more of a lesson illustration, and some lessons span over a couple of days. So just so you have an idea that there aren't 20 entries by the end of a month in their main lesson book. It's at the end of every lesson, they're going to have an entry which is going to include an illustration and some written work. Now, when the children are much younger, say grade 1, 2, and 3, their drawings are going to be more simple, probably with crayons, and their written work may only be a sentence or two, and sometimes it might be copy work, something that the teacher has written down on the chalkboard, or it might be some dictation that the teacher is orally dictating to the students, and the student will write it down. Or in the cases of your students not being able to write yet, or maybe just they don't have the dexterity or the grip or the development for the hand-eye coordination or just the muscle strength, you may actually have your children dictate to you, and then you can write it down as part of their lesson. So there are a lot of choices that you can make when it comes to this, and this is just a really rudimentary overview of what we put into our main lesson books and just a little bit about the main lesson block approach. Now, how do you lesson plan for something like this? Well, over the years, we have departed quite a bit from our Waldorf curriculum, and we have begun making a lot more of our own main lesson blocks and unit studies, which tend to be book rich. So we'll have a lot of books that go into our unit, and part of it is reading these books aloud and then doing some work on those books. And that might be our main lesson book work, which would include our narrations and our drawings. And a lot of times it also includes some hands-on activities and handwork. So things that we're making or knitting or sewing. So how do you lesson plan for something like that? Well, I have a composition notebook that I have covered here. And inside, I will often write a little overview of what we want to read and do within our main lesson blocks or our unit studies. So a lot of times it will include all the books that we want to read. And for instance, I've got here this is Colonial America, I've got our read alouds here. And these are things that I'm going to read aloud to my children, whether they are young or old. I will still do a lot of read alouds as part of our lessons. Now, if you're following a more authentic Waldorf approach, then your read alouds will actually be things that you read ahead of time and then you orally present to your students. But a lot of times, because of all of the books that we end up wanting to read, I just read them aloud to my students as part of our lesson. Included, I also like to put in our games or audiobooks or maybe our hands-on activities that can go along with our lessons. And so when I'm putting together our unit studies, I will head online to some of my favorite vendors. Rainbow Resources is one that I have been using for many years. Acorn Naturalist, Nature Watch, Teacher Innovations, and a couple other science and science vendors, as well as just homeschool vendors. You can find a few of those links down in the description box below if you're interested in seeing some of the places that we love to shop at. And also you can check out our unit study videos, because a lot of times I'll tell you where we're buying our books from and our kits and our projects. So I love including kits and projects and hands-on activities into our main lesson block. So I'll also write those things down as well. Now, on occasion, we may not have kits to go along with our projects, with the projects that we want to do. So in some of those cases, I will use a craft book. Let me find the page here that shows this. So this is from our Middle Ages unit, and you can find all of these details on the various blog posts that accompany each of these unit studies. So if you head to the blog post on my website at pepperandpine.com that has all the things that we did for our Middle Ages unit, you're also going to see some sample pages from how we lesson plan. So for our Middle Ages unit, for instance, I will have how long we expect to do this unit. Now, a lot of times when you're looking at a Waldorf approach, really large unit studies, or rather main lesson blocks, are going to be split up so that they don't last more than about 3 or 4 weeks. And then when you revisit it again after a period of time, when you're doing another main lesson block in between, it allows for you to remember the stuff that you did couple months ago, and it also diminishes academic fatigue because sometimes we'll do a really long main lesson block and we'll just plow through it, and at the end we're just really done and we're really not focused and we're just anxious to get our unit done and get the work finished, and there's not a lot of joy left in it. So we want to avoid that, and we want to stop things before it gets laborious. We do want to train our habits of work and writing, but we don't want to get to the point where we are really disliking a unit study or particular subject area. And so you might look at about 3 to 4 weeks as probably the point where you feel saturated, or you've reached that saturation point where it's time to move on to something else, and then you can revisit it again later. Same goes with your lessons. If you are doing a lengthy lesson and you're finding that your students are really not having it, then you might consider closing that lesson for a moment, taking a break, 15-minute recess, and then coming back in and opening that lesson again. That way you don't have to feel like, well, we closed the lesson, therefore we cannot revisit it until the following day. You don't have to. You can close it for the time being and revisit it a little bit later on in the day. Same goes with your unit studies. You can close them for a couple of weeks and then reopen them a little bit later on. So for our Middle Ages unit, I have about how long we want to cover this unit, and I put 6 to 8 weeks, and honestly, this took probably 20 weeks or 40 weeks because we are still in the middle of doing our Middle Ages unit, only it's completely transformed to something completely different. It's become very rich and very varied, and it's become a world history unit. Then I put in how many hours a day that I want to focus on this. And for our lessons, we have about 2 hours a day. But that 2 hours includes our opening activities, our read alouds, our lesson work, and our review. So it's broken up into different sections. So it's not really literally 2 hours of just work. Then I have our activities that we want to do, our projects, and there are actually a ton more books than the ones listed here. Now with our hands-on projects, I will also look at craft books in order to come up with some projects. So on this following page, I have all of the crafts that I want to do from one of the craft books that we're really enjoying, or that we really enjoyed for our Middle Ages unit. Once I write them all down, then I have to write the supplies that are going to need to go with them. And some supplies I already have, but a lot of times I need to make a little shopping list for myself so that I can start to find those materials so that when we are ready to do these projects, we have all the things that we need. And that's one of the key things about doing these really involved main lesson blocks, is that you do need an element of preparedness so that you can get through these lessons without a lot of, I want to say wasted time, but really it's just a matter of if things are going to take time to arrive, if you're ordering them online or you're going to go to a craft store, you might as well have your complete list so that you don't have to make multiple trips. So that's what we'll do. And generally I over plan and think that we have 50 hours in a single day, and we don't, and the children get tired after a while. So I usually have more scheduled than what we can actually achieve, and this is a shortcoming on my part, where I just think that we're just going to have tons of time and just the ability to do all these projects. So we continued on this page a few more projects that we do, and then lastly, or not always lastly, we like to head to the kitchen, especially with our history units, because it includes a lot of geography and regional studies and cultural studies and of course history. And so we definitely like to head to the kitchen, and that means that I got to look for a cookbook, and then I have to source those ingredients, and then we can work on those recipes together. And generally those are the most memorable activities and lessons that we do within a unit. So even though it takes a lot of time and a lot of prep work, I find that to be something that we definitely don't want to miss, because it is so instrumental in their connection to that lesson or to that whole main lesson block, that they've done something that's hands-on and that they have tasted foods or helped in the preparation of those foods. And they don't always help in the kitchen. Sometimes it's me presenting that feast for them, and that's just a really lovely way to either begin or conclude your unit. Something else that we like to do is head outside for either nature walks or heading to the museum, or even doing a class that's related to the stuff that we're learning. And that really gives them a different perspective on it. And of course, heading to museums to see some of the things that you can't either bring to your home or experience at your home is a really great way to get in touch with some of those things that we're learning. One of our favorite museums was the Rosicrucian Museum up in Northern California that we did at the conclusion of our ancient Egypt main lesson block, and that was fabulous, so amazing. So I definitely highly recommend that you head outdoors to enhance your lessons. So I get all of these things together. Now what? I have a big stack of books. I have all of these projects we want to do, an amazing cookbook. How do I put this all together? I love using my full back sticky Post-its and a pencil or a Sharpie. And I also have my Post-it flags. These are my tools for lesson planning as well as my composition book. What I'll do is I will stick a full back sticky on the back of a book that we're going to be reading, or I will stick it on the back of an activity book or craft book. That way I can write down either how many chapters are in the book, how many chapters we want to cover, whether I'm going to do this as a read aloud or whether I'm going to do this as assigned reading. So I'll write that on the back of the book so that I can keep this all together because we've got so many books. It's just a way for me to organize my thoughts. If it's a craft book or an activity book, I will flag the pages of the activities that we want to do, and then I will use the Post-it on the back to write my materials list or my shopping list for the things that we need to gather together in order to do those projects. And then lastly, because I'm sharing a lot of this online, once we're done with the book, I'm going to write how we liked it and how we used it. So oftentimes these are read alouds, but on occasion, sometimes these books will be assigned reading. Not always, but sometimes we get way too many books. There's just no way that I can read them all. And so starting at around grade 5 or 6, I actually do offer some assigned reading for my students. Up until that point, everything is read aloud. And even beyond that point, most of our books are read aloud, even though my students can read them on their own. So then I will write how we liked the book, whether we plan to do it again. Maybe we didn't even get to that book. Maybe it became assigned reading, how we liked the illustrations, what the level of content I thought was, what grade level, and if the students were going to read it on their own, what grade level I thought it was. So I write those notes down because by the end of our unit, we have done so many books. I sometimes forget how we actually liked a resource, and when I share those in my review video, I want to be as accurate as possible on how we liked it in the moment, because sometimes over time, I might forget that while we really love the illustrations, the content wasn't that great. And so that way I can give you my accurate reflection on the materials that we've used. So once we have all of those things in order, then we just plow through them day by day. Plow through them wasn't a nice way to say it. We actually really enjoy our main lessons, and we aim to do our main lessons on a daily basis. Now, there are some days where that just doesn't happen, and we just resort to just doing some work in our main lesson book without doing the lesson that I will be doing with the children or that I've prepared. But we aim to do something in our main lesson every day, which means that usually it requires a lot of either read alouds or hands-on projects. And that's where I come in, because those are the things that I'm carrying as my responsibility to my students. And then their responsibility to the work is to do either their project, their written narration, or their illustration on a daily basis. Sometimes it's not on a daily basis because they're going to be doing maybe their math worksheets. Well, they're doing their math worksheets every day, or at least their mental math every day. But on some days that we don't have written work for our lesson, just because that lesson might take more than one day. So that is a general overview of how we lesson plan and execute those lesson plans on a daily basis in our homeschool. I hope that was helpful. Don't forget that if you want to participate in these Q&As, all you have to do is leave your question down in the comment section below. If you want to check out some of our other Q&A videos, you can tap on the screen right now. That link is also in the description box below. If you want to see how our homeschool is progressing on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.